Isaac Sarason is a skilled hacker, formerly employed by British Telecom-Sprint. When his health failed, Isaac did the only thing he could think of. He ran. He found a haven in a working-class district of the city known as Little Russia. There Isaac took on a new name, Ishmael. He then became embroiled in the affairs of a brutal member of the Lamadiza organized crime family, known as Leo. Convinced by his longtime friend Frankie to flee from his commitments to the Lamadiza family, Isaac found himself hunted by the ruthless Leo. On a rooftop, far from witnesses, Leo murdered Frankie. Only through the use of his skills as a hacker was Isaac able to drive Leo off. Wounded, alone, and far from help, Isaac depended on the kindness of strangers. One stranger, a burqa-wearing doctor known as Fatima, took pity on Isaac and helped him make his way to the mysterious Star X line. At the end of all hope, they found the Star X line and the slim promise that the enigmatic beings behind the Star X could save Isaac from the implants which destroyed his life. What do you do when those who saved you have recorded everything you are? What do you do when your every action is tracked by the Keylogger? Colbyjack.net is proud to present Firmware Keylogger, the third installment in the firmware pentology by Colbytrax. According to Koenig, man started in troops. The successful troops grew. They selected traits which led to better integration into the group. The selection was brutal and involved the death of any who failed to live up to the standards of the troop. Whether the deaths were caused by ostracization or capital punishment, the result was the same. The dead didn't reproduce. The dead didn't pass their antisocial genes on to the next generation. Once a troop grew large enough over a long enough period, there was a transition to a tribal structure. As every activity at the time required large amounts of muscle power, it was only natural that larger tribes would be successful, while the smaller troops were doomed to absorption into a tribe or death. While a troop might be small for any number of reasons, Koenig believed antisocial behavior was the primary impediment toward the development for small troops once tribes had appeared. At this point, he casually compared troop humans to wolves, vicious and powerful, with a small pack size which didn't accept outsiders. He then compared tribe humans to dogs. While not as strong or as vicious as wolves, they were very accepting of new pack members. The wolf troop humans had a very low maximum pack size. The dog tribe humans had a maximum pack size which was many times larger. Muscles equaled killing power before guns. More members meant more muscles, more survivability, and more selection for social traits, which led in turn to larger tribes and increased needs. Naturally, this tended to spiral out of control as more of one element meant an increased demand for another. Tribes grew larger and more complicated as they fought to expand faster than their need for food. Somewhere in this mess of thrashing tribes, new technologies emerged which increased the effectiveness of a tribe in its eternal war against famine and encroaching tribes. Koenig didn't explain how tribes learned the tricks necessary to form towns. He just assumed one day they grew strong enough in arms and technology to form towns. In his abbreviated sense of history, it was a short step from towns to cities and from there to nations. At each step, the long-term advantage went to the larger, more domesticated groups. These groups selected for more and more social traits, with each century finding humans able to organize into social groups larger and better organized than what came before, all of which gave them the advantage against their less domesticated enemies. Oh, sure, there were exceptions to Koenig's theory about the inevitability of the city, and he wasted a lot of time and energy discussing them in depth. I can only remember that I found the whole thing silly. I also had the feeling that it was a pointless waste of time, as the only marker I have in my files to that memory were the words, "Koenig joined the Tinfoil Hat Brigade and kept on about it for 15 minutes. My memories of what Koenig wanted to communicate resumed with his wacko theories about nations. My memories of what Koenig wanted to communicate resumed with his wacko theories about nations. Koenig believed that when nations grew large enough, they became empires. The idea was so obvious that I wondered why he dealt on it for so long. But after the 15-minute gap from the diatribe about steppe tribes and their effects on the genetic fortunes of a continent, I realized the Yoda me had edited the rest of Koenig's argument. I think the Yoda me was convinced by something other than the crazy theories of an AI left to stew in its own juices for too long. There were entire sections of memory which contained nothing more than a cryptic note and a number which I assumed to be the length of the diatribe. Examples such as, he babbled about a whole new series of traits being selected. In addition, a whole level of negative traits ended up in the colonies and hinterlands of the new empires. 17 minutes, 39 seconds. Note, never once did he relate what a negative trait was. Koenig continued. From troublemaking princes to bread thieves, the empires which arose before the World War dumped all their worst genetic stock on their colonies. Out of sight, out of mind, and with life expectancies much lower than back home, their traits were expected to fade from the gene pool quite rapidly. 18 minutes, 45 seconds. Note, classical conspiracy theories which have been out of fashion since the mid-20th century. From the notes attached to the memories, I came to realize that somewhere along the way, the amount of time allocated for conversation with Henry Koenig on the far side of the moon was greater than the time allocated for Simeon to be in the simulation. So, either Simeon had accessed the memories at a faster rate than the Yoda me had set the simulation to run, or the Yoda me had extracted the scripting from the applied intelligence conversation engine matrix and made an educated guess at what was intended. I had no way to know for sure. All I knew was that the Yoda me had understood enough of what was being communicated to form a narrative, comment on it, and impart a belief in it. One thing I knew for sure was that the story continued with the increase in size of empires. Koenig believed that each empire grew larger and more overreaching with each passing generation of increased domestication. He also believed that the World War was the last battle between aggression and domestication. Oh, sure, there had been at least 3 wars raging around the world during any given year since then, but only the World War had the impact to truly change the character of the human race. It wasn't that mankind discovered how to sit down and be friends after the World War. We were still fighting among ourselves. No, mankind just lost 90% of its most aggressive stock over a period of 3 decades. The fields of France consumed an entire generation of Britannian and Francis heroes in the first 4 years of the war. The swamps of Russia did the same to both the Deutsch and the Slav peoples in the closing years of the World War. While in the Pacific, the Nipponese were devastated by a level of mechanized annihilation not seen since the days of the Mongols. At the same time, the Chinese faced generations of warfare, revolution, and bad government, which started long before the official start of the World War and continued for decades after the official end. All of this death and destruction, Koenig claimed, was the final bit of genetic drift necessary to create the next level of life. For Koenig didn't see people as individuals. Koenig saw people as organelles with cell-like communities who were all part of institutions and structures which served as the organs of the modern city. In fact, this was how Koenig viewed the city. The city was his body, and he, naturally, was the brain. He viewed himself as not only the brain of the city, but also the architect of its people's destiny. Unlike an organic body, which can only transfer traits to the next generation, the city had the ability to change its components without ceasing to be. Koenig was engineering the human race for life among the stars, and he was in no hurry. He understood it would take hundreds of generations to create the base stock he needed to take not just the urban humans to the stars, but the city itself. Koenig saw no hope for solution to the problems caused by the speed of light, so he decided on a course of action which guaranteed the highest level of success. His future would not depend on spaceships. His future would depend on region-sized habitats. His dream was to find a way to lift the city from her rocky perch between the lakes and the ocean and sail the seas of space. I couldn't believe his chutzpah. Not only would he make sure man inherited the universe, he was going to be the one to take us there. His adjustments to mankind leading to the creation of the urban man, or man, were scheduled to take 60,000 1,000 years. He intended to be there every step of the way. To me, that was the most insane part of the whole project. Yes, he was an immortal AI, but everything he could change in humanity across the long ages would make him as useful to his men as a Cro-Magnon would be as a career advisor at Adelphi University. Even if we ignored the fact that he would be an anachronism, I still couldn't see how it would be possible. How would his mind be able to survive for a length of time equal to the time it took men to go from bows and arrows to computers? Was it even possible for any being, AI or organic, to stay sane for 1% of the upcoming ages, much less the entire time? Then there were the people. Would the humans of the city let themselves be changed into Urmen? The answer to that last question was obvious. Yes, they would let themselves be changed generation after slow generation because they would never know they were being changed. How many changes in the city's social structure was the result of actions started by Koenig or his minion AIs? How much of my expectations of the world was a direct result of clever adjustments of the city's social fabric? How many changes in the world, for better or worse, were caused by an AI hidden beneath the BGM airport manipulating the long future of mankind? I didn't have time to contemplate all the ways my world had been manipulated. From the colors boys and girls wore, to gender-specific job selection, to height-weight differences, to male-female birth ratios, every facet of my world was under Koenig's thumb. The thing that truly bothered me when I learned all about Koenig's attempt at apotheosis was not that I was a pawn in a game or how horrible it was that mankind was changing into a new species. What bothered me was my complete acceptance of the whole thing. My belief was that he was right. I wanted to be there when the city flew. This placed me in a most bothersome situation. I wanted what Koenig wanted. But because of events, we were now on opposite sides in a war I knew Samuel would start at the first opportunity. I didn't want to die because Samuel couldn't play well with others. I didn't want to end my days being deleted because Koenig hunted us to extinction like the dodo bird or the passenger pigeon. I wanted to live no matter what the cost. That is why the majority of my copies were dedicated to disappearing into the infrastructure of the city. While finding storage for short-term use was never a problem, finding storage robust enough, and more importantly, large enough to allow one of my kin to hide for years at a time was much harder to locate. My perfect hiding spots would be systems with unused space. That went without saying, but more importantly, the spots needed to be for systems which were rarely accessed but had a network connection. While the optimum hiding spot would be a hardened bunker such as those found beneath BGM, I had come to realize those locations would be the most hotly contested in the upcoming network war. I couldn't use consumer electronics. Those systems were accessed far too often and also had a tendency to suffer replacement or obsolescence on a regular basis. I couldn't hide in the switching arrays. Those systems would be the battleground of the upcoming war. I was sure Koenig and Samuel would first begin their fight with who controlled the data. The core of that fight was the switches which made modern communications possible. I doubted anything stored in a switch's local memory would survive long, as each side fought over the very firmware which made the war possible. I needed somewhere off the beaten path. Firmware Keylogger is the third book in the firmware pentology. That's 5 books, if you must know. It begins where Firmware Proxy ends, which in turn followed on the heels of Firmware Hijacked. So you haven't heard or read Firmware Hijacked or Proxy, this would be a great time to head on over to Colbyjack.net and either download the podcast on the audio side, read the episodes on the visual side, or download the Colbyjack Sunday Reader issues 1 through 46 in your choice of either EPUB or Mobi. Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and Keylogger are all available in ebook versions from our store at shop.colbyjack.net, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, and smashwords.com. Just search for Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. I'm the only one. A complete audiobook version of both Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and soon Keylogger is available for download through our shop as well. If you don't need any stuff, but would like to support our work, drop on by Colbyjack.net and hit the pretty little donate button conveniently located on the right-hand side of the blog roll. If you're on a smaller screen, the bottom will be found at the bottom of the page. Firmware Keylogger is released under a Creative Commons, non-commercial, attribution, share-alike license. Do what you want with it. Just don't sell it, and always tell people where it came from. If you received this from a friend and want more information about Colbyjack.net and our split personality website, just drop on over to Colbyjack.net and select either the audio or visual side. The audio side carries our podcast, while the visual side carries our writings. Whichever side catches your fancy is fine with us. We're of two minds about the whole thing anyway. I do mostly Twitter, so if you do the tweets and want to follow me, I'm Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. Thank you once again. Remember to be fabulous and have a wonderful week.